let's get through some heart anatomy here, or at least a little bit of it. Take a little break. Well, we've already hinted at a lot of this stuff in our nice little preview at the beginning. Okay. But let's just kind of see what we have here. We have multiple different views. We have an anterior view and a posterior view. We don't really, there are lateral views, but they don't really show a whole heck of a lot. So I'm not going to really worry about those two. But the anterior view and the posterior view, that's what you're going to be looking at when you are studying this stuff, these structures. When you look at the anterior view of the heart here, you can see a number of things. Well, I mean, you can see, superior and inferior vena cava. Okay. You can see the pulmonary trunk. You can see pulmonary arteries. You can see the ascending aorta, the arch of the aorta, and as it goes down, the descending aorta. Okay. So those are, the arteries that you see here. There are some more here. We'll build upon these. This guy right here is basically the right atrium. It's all that wrinkly stuff is called actually the right auricle, but who cares? Let's call it the right atrium. Because that's basically telling us what in the world is behind it. And then all of this region right here is our right ventricle. Okay. We're going to see some arteries there, some veins as well. Okay, so we'll build and build and build as we look and add more things here. But those are the kind of the major superficial structures that we have here. And we kind of mentioned those earlier. The left side. Kind of right here. That's going to be our left ventricle. And here, as you kind of look at it here, there's my left atrium. So I got chambers and major arteries and veins on this anterior surface of the heart. If you look on the posterior side, you can see there's the bulk of the left ventricle. Here's this funky looking left atrium. A little bit of the right ventricle, but for the most part, that's what you see on the front. And I mean, you can see the pulmonary veins bringing blood back into that left atrium, oxygenated blood into that left atrium. You see the pulmonary arteries on the backside. Again, you can see the arch and the descending as it goes down this backside as well. See the two vena cavas. A major structure that you see that they mention right here, that big blue bulge, that's the coronary sinus right there. The coronary sinus is one of those major vessels that returns blood to that right atrium. And we would see this a little bit better if we were doing the dissections, this slide. I don't kill yourself memorizing every single word on here. When we do the dissections, we can remove some structures and you can see kind of the shallow depressions that we have. And that's what the sulci are, just some shallow depressions that occur on the surface of the heart. They're there for, they are the lines, the landmarks that separate the left side from the right side, the left and right ventricles. the atria from the ventricles. So these these are a lot more kind of useful if we do the dissection, and we're not doing the dissection. So you really don't see these sulci here in any of the pictures. At least I don't believe you did. What are there though? What's in these shallow little depressions? Arteries and veins. Okay, arteries and veins. That coronary sulcus, I mean, the coronary sinus sits in it. Okay, the coronary sinus sits in it right there. And so you don't see that shallow little groove that exists between the two atria up top and the two ventricles down below. So don't kill yourself trying to memorize what sulci are. Just shallow depressions, just like they were in the brain. They're basically the same thing. They're grooves, shallow grooves. And what's in them? Arteries and veins. This is significant, though. The heart, the thickness of that heart is drastically different from one side to the other. Remember, the right side is associated with the pulmonary circuit. The left side is associated with the systemic circuit. So why would it mean, or why does it matter that the right side would be so much more thinner than the left side? Anybody want to jump in? Well, I got it written right there, so I guess it's not earth-shattering if you can read. But that right side, I don't have to generate a whole heck of a lot of force, right? I just got to pump it to the lungs. So it's not going a huge distance. That left side has to pump blood with enough force to get it out to your fingertips, up to your brain, down to your pinky toes, all at the same rate. Has to overcome gravity in some parts, right? Going up to the brain. So it has to generate a heck of a lot of force. Whereas the right ventricle, I don't have to. It's going to the lungs. They're right next to it. Also, do you want fluid going through those delicate structures at a high rate? No, you blow out the alveoli. Or blow out the capillaries that surround the alveoli, and you wouldn't have gas exchange very effectively at all. Excuse me. So it would make sense that I'm not going to generate a whole heck of a lot of force on that right side compared to the left. And on dissection, oh my gosh, that is so, it is very, it's one of those things you're like, wow, I did not realize that that left ventricle was so meaty. And it is. It's huge in terms of the amount of muscle that it has within it compared to the right side. Right side looks like just an empty sack. It's crazy. When we look at the heart, there's our three layers. There's the first one. We've already kind of mentioned it earlier, the epicardium. And really, what's the difference between them? Why is there a difference between them? I don't know why there's a difference between them, but I do know why the difference exists. The difference exists because one's a connective tissue structure and one's more of a various different layers of the heart. So it just depends on what you're looking at or what your eyesight is. And by eyesight, I mean, what's your point of view? If you're somebody who is thinking that it's more pericarditis, well, then you're going to refer to it as the visceral layer of the serous pericardium that may be inflamed and irritated. If you're talking about the ability of the heart to pump, then you're talking about the different layers of the heart. And when you're talking about the different layers of the heart, well, you could talk about the muscle, the myocardium. You could talk about inflammation of the simple squamous lining of the inside of the heart. That would be the endocardium. Endocarditis would be a infection involving inflammation of that innermost layer of the heart itself, which is going to affect the valves, cause issues with how blood flow moves through it. And the epicardium is just that outermost layer. And as you can see, it has a little bit of fat in it. And you know what? A little bit of fat is okay. Okay. It has some areolar, some adipose, and that's okay. A little bit of fat is not bad around some of these organs. It helps to cushion them and protect them. Now, if there's a hell of a lot of fat around that outside of the heart, which can happen with a crappy diet, now we got an issue. Now the heart has to basically pump with a weighted vest on. And if you've ever worn a weighted vest and tried to exercise, you know that ain't fun. Well, it is, but it's more difficult. And it's more difficult for the heart to expand to try to pump with that extra weight on it. So a little fat's okay. A lot of fat is not okay. The myocardium, it's the thickest. Myo means muscle. Myo means muscle. And specifically, what kind of muscle we're talking about? Good gosh almighty, I hope you know. It's cardiac muscle. It's striated, but it's also highly branched, has gap junctions, all those fun things that we talked about at the beginning. And again, the innermost lining is referred to as the endo. Endo means within, innermost. So this is covering the internal surface of it. It's basically simple squamous epithelium. Okay. That's that endothelial lining. It's continuous with the blood vessels as well. It's also continuous with your valves. So the valves are an extension of that endocardium. We have a couple walls that exist between the two sides, between the left and the right atrium, between the left and the right ventricles. They are called the interatrial septum and the interventricular septum. Ideally, in the growing bambino, the interventricular septum is solid and complete. I don't really want any type of gap existing between the developing, between the two sides of the heart in utero. And excuse me, in utero between the atria, though, I holes are okay. And you have one called the foramen ovale. Foramen ovale helps to shunt blood from the right atrium, which is oxygenated, okay? Because this is oxygenated blood that's come from mom. And it shunts it across over to the left side so it can pump blood throughout the growing fetus. Lungs are non-functional in utero, right? I mean, this baby isn't breathing oxygen. It's inside a fluid-filled sac, for gosh sakes. So I have some adaptations for in utero life. And this foramen ovale is one of them. As soon as the baby comes on out and starts screaming, that inflates the lungs, causes a negative pressure within the system, the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system, helps to inflate the lungs for one, and it helps to close that hole, that foramen ovale. There's a little flap of tissue that comes down, shuts up. That's that remnant that you can see is called the fossa ovalis. It's just an oval depression that exists within that interatrial septum. It's how you know you're looking at it, to be honest. So those are the two septum. If we have those holes or we have holes between those two septa outside after birth, obviously this is now we're having some very serious congenital heart defects here, and they need to be fixed relatively quick. You can have a patent foramen ovale for several years of life and not know it. It just depends on the degree, I guess. They're fair. They should be fairly caught easily. I went to school with a girl. She didn't know she had a patent foramen ovale until she was in junior high. No, freshman. She's a freshman. And she passed out during a volleyball game and didn't wake up. It was that much wear and tear on her heart. She was an athlete too, very athletic. Sad. If you have a hole between the two sides of the ventricles there and that interventricular septum, that one's going to be massively affecting the individual. They're going to be so tired. They're not going to be able to effectively pump blood. I mean, they're pumping oxygen and deoxygenated blood at the same time throughout the body. And that's not a good thing coming out of that left ventricle. So
what did you mean when you said patent?
Patent means open.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. The first chamber we start with, guys, is always going to be the right side. I always start on the right side. For me, it's just easiest to start with the deoxygenated blood and talk about getting oxygen. So that's where I start. That's why I start here. The first chamber we have is the right atrium. Again, it receives blood from the superior and inferior vena cavas and the coronary sinus. Okay, coronary sinus is bringing blood returning from the heart. Superior from above the heart, inferior returning blood from below the heart. From the right atrium, we head into the right ventricle, but we have to go through a door, a valve, and that is the right atrioventricular valve or the tricuspid valve. Once we're in the right ventricle, now we're basically going to be pumping that deoxygenated blood towards the lungs. Within it, though, we see a number of really important things. Two of them are in bold for you. We see papillary muscles, and we see chordae tendineae. Papillary muscles are these cone-shaped. It's this right here. This is muscle. This is muscle. And there's another one back there. There's muscle. Here's the bicuspid side. Two cusp. Two sets of muscles. Okay, so those are the papillary muscles. They are, where's my thing? There it is. Okay. This is what they do. Papillary muscles anchor down the chordae tendineae. What are the chordae tendineae? They are just the strands of fibers that attach to the AV valves. Chordae tendineae look like the strings on the parachute. These AV valves look like parachutes when you look at them under dissection. So if I go forward here again, here's my parachute, cusp of my valves. Here are the parachute strings. Okay, those are the chordae tendineae. And the chordae tendineae anchor down into these papillary muscles. How does that work? Well, when this chamber contracts, it increases the pressure within it. That forces the blood up against these cusp here, right? And that's going to shut this door up. And I know I made a semi-lunar picture there, but I'm just trying to visualize it being shut. But now this chamber, as it continues to contract, it's going to generate a good chunk of force. The papillary muscles contract and pull on those chordae tendineae to prevent that pressure from pushing those cusp of the valves backwards. So those are pretty important structures to know because they really to help prevent those valves to work properly. So I got the cusp of the valves, I've got the chordae tendineae, and I've got the papillary muscle. And all three of them are involved in helping to maintain forward movement of blood through the system. As we exit out the right ventricle, we go through the pulmonary semilunar valve, to the pulmonary trunk, to left and right pulmonary arteries. Go to the lungs, pick up some O2, drop off the CO2. Come back in pulmonary veins and enter into the left atrium. Atria just collect blood. That's all they do. Nothing fantastic. Left atrium allows blood to pass from it through the left atrioventricular valve or the bicuspid valve. Again, you try before you buy. I guess you used to. I don't know if anybody tries on anything anymore. I don't think you can. But that's the mnemonic I remembered. I try stuff on before I buy it. Goes to the bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle. And in there, we have the same thing that we have in the right. I have the cusp of the valve, I have the chordae tendineae, I have the papillary muscle, and they do the same thing, except they do it a hell of a lot better. Just because that left ventricle generates a heck of a lot more force. Go through the aortic semilunar valve, and you can see it's kind of tucked way up high there into the ascending aorta, into the arch of the aorta, and then to wherever we're going to go. Where are we going? Where are we going? Brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid, left subclavian. Are we going down the body? Well, now I got to go down the descending aorta, into the abdominal aorta, into wherever, into the appendages, lower appendages. And it's these valves that are ensuring, again, that this fluid, blood, goes forward through the system. Everything I just said earlier. Here you can see the shape of that semilunar structured valve. Again, whether it's pulmonary or aortic, don't matter. They function the same way. Allow blood to easily get ejected through them when the ventricles contract on either side. And as blood starts to go backwards to the system, the valves stop that. The shape of them, as blood starts to run back, it fills that side and slams the door shut. Here you can see shape of the valves, the way they're orientated, and that down easily go through from the atria to the ventricles. When the ventricles contract, that force pushes up against them, closes them up, and then the chordae, tendineae, and the papillary muscles, well, the papillary muscles contract, pull on those chordae, tendineae, and prevent those cusps from being inverted. And that's what a heart murmur is. If you can hear that blood getting in between these two valves, and these AV valves here, you'll hear that. That's what the heart murmur is. And there's very different degrees. It's super complex, to be honest. I have a great website for you. I'll just go back here real quick. They're the auscultation assistant. If you click on that, that takes you to the auscultation assistant website. I can't remember which medicine school put it on. Somebody out west. Gosh, I cannot remember off the top of my head. I just checked to make sure it worked today or yesterday too, earlier in the semester as well. So I know it works. But man, unless you know what you're looking for, and they are some of the hardest things to hear. And this website does a fantastic job of showing you you're going to listen to them. You're going to be like, what the hell? I don't. And just think about this. You're not sitting in a quiet room hitting repeat over and over and over again to try to hear that subtle sound that you need to hear for valves, for valvular stenosis issues or heart murmur issues. You're going to be in an office setting, screaming people, screaming kids, humming of lights, yelling of people. It is so hard. This website it was awesome. It was awesome. So take a look. It's pretty cool. You'll be like, holy smokes. My wife, she has one. Jennifer, she has a slight little murmur. And our youngest has that as well. I'm not worried about either of them, to be honest. We know about his, so we kind of monitor it, and he's perfectly fine. He's a crazy buffoon anyway and running around all the time, so he's perfectly fine. But it is something that, for the yearly checkup, it gets looked at, gets listened to, and all that stuff. Jennifer, she has like a resting heart rate in her 50s, so she has pretty good heart health. So she has an effective pumper. So that slight little murmur doesn't really affect her very much at all. So, but as I'm on this slide, you can see the A pet monkey. That's the little mnemonic. A pet monkey. That's the mnemonic. You can hear the aortic valve right here in the second right intercostal space. If you go right across to the left intercostal space, in the second intercostal space, you can hear the pulmonary valve. Very medial there, right along the border of the sternum. Go down, that's called Erb's point. Erb's point. That is the optimal place to hear every single valve, to be honest. It's kind of the sweet spot. Go down into that fourth intercostal space, you can hear the tricuspid valve. That's what T stands for. And M, you got to kind of go mid-clavicular. Mid-clavicular is probably the best way to identify it. You could say nipple line extended, but not everybody's nipples in the same spot, to be honest. So mid-clavicular line. And this can be found in the fifth or the sixth intercostal space, to be honest. And that's where you can hear the mitral valve. So it's weird. You hear it all the way out there. It's just, again, the way the heart is orientated within the mediastinum and how it's twisted and orientated and turned. It's just the best place to hear those things. So there's a little link to the website for that picture. So it's pretty cool. The sounds that you hear, lub dub, lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. Okay. Here the AV valves closing and the semilunar valves closing. That's the lub dub. Lub dub. It's S1 and S2. There's some other sounds that you can hear. There's an S3 and there's an S4. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but they're minor sounds. And that's kind of their fancy pants names. I don't know why they've been given the names of sinus 1, sinus 2. I can't remember off the top of my head, so I apologize. But those are the sounds that you hear when you got your stethoscope on and you're listening to your loved one's chest there when you're sitting around doing nothing. I'm not going to get into it anymore, guys. Fiber skeleton, structural support. That's what I was talking about earlier, framework for attachment within the heart itself. It actually helps to compartmentalize the heart into those three layers. It gives the cardiac muscle something to anchor to as well. So it's kind of weird and funky, but the biggest thing, guys, was structural support, holding it in place, preventing it from overfilling. That's really what I want you to know about it. We'll mention this last thing and then we'll pause and take a little break here. The arrangement, because we're going to talk about the cardiac muscle. Obviously, we're going to talk about how it contracts the cardiac muscle. We're going to talk about how it initiates the contraction process, and that's through some specialized structures within the heart. So we'll get into all that, but this last concept here is just the arrangement. And I'm going to go forward a slide here. When you look at the heart, the bundles of this thing, even though we always look at it at cross section, when you look at it kind of right here, the orientation of the heart muscle, of the cardiac muscle, is this kind of circular appearance, okay, this spiral appearance. And you're like, why would it do this? The heart doesn't just, the heart doesn't pump top to bottom. Well, it does, but the heart is weird. When you watch a heart contract, when you visualize it, when you see it in some of the videos online, it is actually being wrung out like a wet hand towel. And it does that to ensure that we get the majority of blood ejected from the heart. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the heart is not 100% effective. Nothing is 100% effective in the body, right? Nothing is. Cellular respiration is only 33% efficient. The heart, it's not that bad, efficiency-wise. But not every single ounce of blood gets ejected out of that heart. But it damn near does. And it damn near does because of the orientation of these cardiac bundles, these cardiac muscle fibers. They're in this kind of spiral fashion there. And it just ensures that we contract from the top down. But as we've contracted at the very top, by the time the contraction occurs down in the ventricles, the top is relaxed and it's allowing blood to be ejected up and out the pulmonary and aortic trunks, respectively. So the orientation of this the orientation of this cardiac muscle is kind of unique in that regard because it does have this weird spiral kind of format. And it's there to basically ensure that the heart contracts and empties as much as it's supposed to, okay? Because it's not going to be 100% effective. There's a little bit of blood that gets left behind in the two bottom chambers. But it is spirally orientated, and that's kind of weird and unique. So that's why I mention it. Some other microscopic structures that we got here. I hope none of this is earth-shattering for you. Hopefully this should be a review. We have cardiac muscle cells. They are short. They are branched. Okay. And again, this is what comprises the myocardium itself. When we look at those individual muscle fibers, we see it has a plasma membrane. It's still called a sarcolemma, just like it was with skeletal. We have those invaginations that occur called the T-tubules, those transverse tubules. They extend down from the surface of the sarcolemma. We have sarcoplasmic reticulum, just like we did with skeletal muscles. So far, nothing's too crazy different. We have myofilaments arranged in sarcomeres. I mean, holy smokes. Really, nothing's different. Okay. Really, nothing's different. There is a little bit of difference when we start looking at the semantics of the zone of overlap. That is different. Skeletal muscle has a much larger zone of overlap when we compare it to cardiac muscles. Cardiac muscle, we have a little bit less of a zone of overlap occurring, and that's important. Why is it important? Why is it important? Well, if I have, I'm going to do a drawing. I know it stinks. So here's my right, there's the thick. Of course it is. Okay, and there's my thin. So if, like in skeletal muscle, the zone of overlap, there's negligible zone of overlap, but there's a lot of real estate here for that to happen. So skeletal muscles can generate a lot of force. In the heart, the zone of overlap, it's a little different. just going to draw, well, let's draw the one. There's already a little bit of overlap that exists here. So what does that mean? That means I only can generate that much amount of force. Now for skeletal muscle, that's not optimal, right? I want to be generating as much force as I possibly can if I want to move this sucker. But in the heart, there's a little bit of overlap already that naturally occurs, and that's perfectly cool. It really, it ensures that I produce the right amount of force. It also gives me some wiggle room, because now what can happen? Well, if something happens in the system and I have a little bit more overlap occurring, or I have a little bit more fluid coming back, and I have a little bit more of that thing called overexpansion, because the heart's filling up with a little bit more fluid, a little bit more blood. Well, now I have it built in to where I can, if I have a little bit of overfilling, okay, I can have the heart stretch out a little bit more, okay, and that's less than that. And let's say I have even more over filling of the heart. Okay, I have a built-in fallback position just in case something's happening and my heart is being overfilled with blood returning to it. Because if it was this setup like it is in skeletal muscle, if that heart overfilled, I'm SOL. If I don't have any actin and myosin there ready to interact with one another, there ain't nothing going to happen. So with cardiac muscle, I have a little bit of this thing called overlap occurring between those actin and myosin filaments. But now what happens though is I overfill and I have more and more and more zone of overlap. What does that mean I'm generating? It means I'm generating a lot more force now. But that makes sense. I have to. I have a greater volume of blood that's coming back to the heart. More blood that needs to be pushed. I need to generate more force. There we go. That's how we do it. But I mean, this is not optimal, right? I mean, more blood is coming back to the heart because something's wrong with the system somewhere. And now the heart's having to work extra hard. So is this a model that can be kept up? No. Angina, MI. So this is something that just can't be kept up. So just because we can have a little bit of overfill doesn't mean we want that to happen. What is going on? Okay, there we go. So there's a nice little fantastic picture looking at sarcolemma, the T2 pupils. We got our sarcomeres. Oh, fantastic. Sarcoplasmic reticulum wrapped around all those fantastical myofilaments. But there's something else that we contain, and you can see all that. Oh, gosh, look at that. God, that's so fantastic, isn't it? Sarcomere. Oh, you thought it would never come back to haunt you. Here it is. What else do we have, though, inside cardiac muscle that's really, really, really separates it from skeletal? It is intercalated disc. What's an intercalated disc? It is basically a gap junction, but it's also very, very, very tightly fused from one cell to the next. So an intercalated disc, when you look at it, it is both A desmosome, because this thing is generating force, it's expanding, it's contracting, okay, several times a minute for your entire life. So we have a lot of desmosomes there to help hold all that, all those cells together that are generating a lot of mechanical action. And it's also allowing ions to quickly move from one cell to the next. How do we do that? We do that through a gap junction. And that's how that electricity is going to flow through this thing. We call this a functional syncytium. Syncytium. The heart contracts as a unit. You don't have the left side of the heart contract and the right side of the heart contract. You don't get one side. If only one side is pumping, then you're having a heart attack and you're going to be dead anyway. So it's not conducive to life. But this heart contracts as a unit from the top down. And that is what is called a functional syncytium. How that electricity moves through the heart, we're going to see. How that electricity gets through the heart and into the muscle cells, don't worry. We'll see. As you can imagine, around the 4th to 7th week of life, you got a bunch of cells congealing together there, becoming the heart. And really, they don't stop until you die. So they have a very, very, very high energy demand. So because they have a very high energy demand, oh my gosh, does it make sense that they would have a very extensive blood supply? Yep, and the heart does. If you've ever seen those bodies revealed things that used to come through town before everything happened, or if I think the book may have a picture. I know previous versions of this book did. The vasculature for the blood or for the heart is extensive. It needs a constant supply of oxygen, nutrients to be able to do all the stuff that it does. If we have a very extensive blood supply, what do we have a huge amount of? Mitochondria. What are mitochondria? Powerhouse of the cell. What does that mean? It means they make energy, make ATP. To do that, they need oxygen. So we have a lot of myoglobin. Okay. Myoglobin holds on to the oxygen inside that muscle. And we have a lot of creatine kinase to, kickstart and get this thing going. It relies mostly on aerobic metabolism, not anaerobic. The heart cannot function in an anaerobic state. So it is going to rely on aerobic metabolism. It is not one of those that can switch over into an anaerobic mode. A lot of great questions there. I mean, it's all a lot of anatomy. A lot of it is review, understanding what aerobic cellular metabolism is, cellular respiration, sorry. But just a lot of anatomy,